welcome back to the channel. Now, let's talk turbocharger replacement a little bit. I hope you don't have to do this, okay? My BMW is a 428i, it's a 2014, and it's known as the F32 body. And apparently, you know, I don't know, this turbo lasted pretty good. It was 139,000 miles whenever it went out. So I guess that's, I don't know, maybe kind of understandable. But then again, I'm bad with changing oil on time, and I understand the turbo is, you know, lubricated by the oil. So who knows, maybe the oil just was running through it too bad and it wasn't lubricating as good, I don't know. But I hope you don't have to do this, okay? If you're unfortunate and your turbo did go out, I'm not sure all the symptoms that you might get, but mine was basically a complete loss of the boost. I mean, you could hear the turbo whining up and down. Woo! Like, you could pretty much hit the accelerator and get the turbo to whine up and down, but it's like the RPM wouldn't change very much. Now, I tried to look up and search this symptom, but even people who knew about turbochargers, they were just like, oh, it sounds to me like you have a loss of boost pressure. But there were a few of them that still thought the turbo could be okay. They just thought maybe there was a boost leak or something, you know, and I was kind of thinking the same thing, but I also know how things are different. You know, this turbocharger is a big assembly, and if it failed internally, which that was something I read, I was like, well, I guess it could be leaking within itself, and that's gonna mean, you know, turbo's bad. So that's what it ended up being. I ended up taking it into a shop after I looked at it myself. The first time I took the front curved plastic boot off, I couldn't really feel shaft play. I don't think I got my fingers in there and tried to move it enough, I guess. But I felt like the shaft was pretty tight, so there was part of me that thought, well, maybe the turbo's okay, and I ended up taking it into a shop. I also wanted to see if the extended warranty was going to cover it, which that just ended up being a fiasco. I'll never do an extended warranty again because I fix all my own stuff. But that shop did end up verifying that the turbo was bad, and once I got back and started taking it apart, I gave that shaft a little bit more wiggle to try and see if I could get the shaft to play and move a bit, and it did. It actually wiggled a little bit side to side, but more so in and out, you know, maybe a good quarter-inch or so. So I decided, okay, I'm going to break this thing down and take care of it myself. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is AutoZone, and I'm not affiliated with them or sponsored or anything, but my local AutoZone was actually able to order this turbo. And what I like about that is that if you're getting it somewhere locally, you don't have to worry about shipping in a core charge or something. I mean, sure, you could order one online, and I want to say the prices I found were anywhere from $1,100 to $1,300 or $1,500 for one. But the price I got at AutoZone, I think, was a little bit over $900, and it was like a $230 core charge. So I ended up getting back that money, and I really only spent a little over $700 on buying the new turbo. So that was really cool. And if you're having trouble, you know, wondering where to source the part, just check your local AutoZone. And they kind of had to dig through the computer. I can't remember if he was able to select turbo or if he had to go to turbo kit or turbocharger. I don't know what it was. But, you know, have them look through the computer because AutoZone does carry it. I mean, at least they were able to get it here in Texas where I'm at. Now, once you have verified that the turbo's bad and you're ready to start changing it, hopefully this is going to help you out a bit. I'm not doing a straight step-by-step video, but there's some points that I'm going to highlight in here, and hopefully that's going to help answer the same questions that I had. There are some things, of course, that are obvious. You know, you can see how to take the turbo off. If you've worked on cars before, you're able to figure things out. But there were some tricky parts about this one, and really it wasn't a terrible thing to have to do myself. I mean, I've done much more difficult work, but it was a little bit tight, you know, working in there, and you know, being able to get that whole assembly out and back in, that was definitely one of the big parts. But I was able to pull it off. Jump into this video. I'll show you guys what I was able to do, and hopefully it'll help you make it a little bit smoother for yourself. basically, to start out, you got to get rid of your air box. You got to take those things off, you know, right there in the front that make it really difficult to see. I mean, there's some big things you get out of the way. So the air box comes out pretty easily, and once you get that part out, you're going to go underneath, and there's that little 90-degree curved plastic boot that runs to the turbo. Now there's a few other oil lines and things that connect to it, but the main thing, you need to get some access to this thing first. So just look around, and there's a few things that come out fairly easily. There's one, I want to say a 10mm nut that holds that curved boot on, and you're going to have to feel for it once you get your air box out. It's way up underneath there. You know, just kind of follow that little boot. If anything, you know, put your hand under it, and you'll be able to feel where there's a stud coming out, and it's got that little nut actually, you know, on there holding it. So get those things out of the way, and then you can continue kind of working on the turbo itself. Okay, I'm just doing a brief rundown on where I'm at so far. Now, there's a lot of videos on YouTube for taking out, you know, you're going to pull the air cleaner. There's this little pipe that goes up to the engine, and it also connects to this intake pipe that goes to the turbo. And of course, that's one little 10mm at the bottom of that. So like I said, it's just a nut. So there's a lot of videos on this, but I got these pieces out, right? And here we are. I've gone under the car. I've got it sitting up on some jack stands and some jacks. So remember, to do this turbo replacement, you're going to take the actuator off right here at the little nut that goes on the tip of it. You can see my finger swinging it there. So that's swinging right now. The other thing is getting this charge pipe off can be kind of a pain. I end up having to use a pair of needle nose pliers and stick it in both the little hills of that clip, because you got to get both of those pulled out pretty tight, and that hose will pull right off. But I don't know why my clips are an absolute pain. Now, here's a problem that I found, and I'm thinking when I took it to the shop to let them look at it, they might have pulled on something in here, because I've had this taken apart once already. I was in here looking around trying to feel the shaft play, which my shaft does play about 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more. And I was in here before. I didn't see this. I'm pretty sure this wasn't that way, but this wire plug was broken off. So it's the one that goes right over here to the actual turbo. I don't know what that little thing is. It looks like it could be some kind of little, it's that black part right there. It looks like it could be some kind of a solenoid or some kind of little sensor for the turbo. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's that right there. So I already took the plug off. I ordered another one, and hopefully it'll be here within a few days. So all I'm gonna do is, the plug that I ordered comes with the little clips that go on the wire. So I'm just gonna basically rebuild the plug with the parts I bought, and that should be fine. Now, with a part that's fairly large like this turbo assembly, it's always going to be wise to unhook anything that you can, or disconnect things that aren't so much the main part of holding it to the car. You know, I always feel like, you know, you should have your hardware in place. Like when you're putting it in, you know, you put it in place, and then you can attach everything that goes to it as far as, you know, accessory type stuff. The turbo is kind of the same way. You know, you don't want to go taking all the barrel nuts off first, and then you've got, you know, all this other stuff connected to it that's just kind of, it's dangling there with all these other connections. So I took some time to get the O2 sensor out. You'll see that I talk about heating it with the torch. There's a bracket underneath that had to come off. There were 2 reverse torque bolts, and that's okay to undo because you still have all those barrel nuts holding the manifold to the head. And then, you know, anything else that you could take off to make it a little bit easier on you, taking the actuator out, you know, disconnecting those coolant lines and the oil line. There's, you know, and then of course once you get ready to do the exhaust, there's a part where if you're laying underneath the car, it's really beneficial. It's basically, if you're right under where the exhaust connects to the turbo, you go back a little ways, and I want to say there were 2 or 3 bolts that were basically a mounting bracket, and as soon as you loosen those, the exhaust system has a lot more movement, and you end up actually being able to loosen the clamp that holds the exhaust right kind of where you're going to be working, and you can push the exhaust system back far enough to where you can completely remove that little clamp, you can disconnect it, and that allows you to get, you know, the part that goes to the turbo. I think it's the catalytic converter. I don't know. I did this a few months ago, so, and of course, like this, a lot of this stuff is newer to me. I haven't worked on mechanical stuff in a long time, so things look a little bit different than they used to. But yeah, I feel like it was the catalytic converter where it connects right there behind the turbo. You got a lot more room to work if you move the exhaust system back with those mounts being loosened, and then you have that clamp loosened so you can slide those two pieces apart. You'll see what I'm talking about if you get underneath there and work. So what I'm at right now is I'm going around the manifold, taking off all those little copper colored nuts, the barrel nuts that hold it on. One thing that you're going to have to do back here is, you can see the O2 sensor, I've got it sitting out. What I did was I took a little propane torch. You could probably use oxyacetylene if you want to be careful with that, you'll blow holes in it. I took my propane torch, sorry for the shaky camera, I just heated around the bung right there because you want that to expand a little bit. And I heated it up pretty good, and then I was able to get a crow's foot. I want to say it was a 7/8. So I was able to get a crow's foot in there with an extension, and I had to use a step up for a 1/2-inch drive ratchet. And if you get that ratchet to lay right here against the wall, you can put a piece of like 1-inch square tubing. I think that's what I used. No, it might be 3/4. Whatever it was, I used this. It's a perfect cheater bar because it fits tight over that ratchet handle. And once I was able to crack the O2 sensor loose, it was able to spin out. But there's a bracket that's also in the way, and you can see it's that metal bracket that's attached to it, or kind of sitting with it right here. Let me see, I'm blocking the light now. Yeah, you can see the metal bracket. Anyway, right there. Now, that bracket wraps around the back of the engine. So what I did is I took my hand and I just followed it. Like, I put my fingers on it and I followed it to the back of the engine. And that's where you find this, I don't know what number it is. I know an 8mm socket fit on it, but it's a reverse torque. Let me see if I can get that size for you real quick. It is a, let's see, just hold on. Alright, the size you're going to want to use for that little bolt on the back of the engine is a 10mm reverse torque star, whatever. So that's how you get that little bracket off. Once that's loose, okay, once that bracket is loose, now you can get to the barrel nut that's behind the O2 sensor. It's just kind of in the way. Let me show you what those things look like. What I'm using to get those off is a good old ratchet with this, you know, whatever, 2 or 3 inch extension, and it's got an 11mm socket on it. So basically, around the manifold, you've got those barrel nuts, and I want to say, let's see, there's one up here I can feel. There's probably 4 across the top. 4 or 5, I can't really remember. I don't have them all out yet. I just have 4 of them out. You see, well, 3. But I'm almost at 4. I think the 4th one's still back there. So anyway, that's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. Now, as far as the lines on the turbo, there's a screw underneath, and then there's a screw right, let me see. Okay, this line goes down and it curves a little bit that way. The screw is basically setting right inside that curve. So let me see if we can get mine in there. Basically, let's go from underneath really quick. This might be better. Okay, so if you look at the line that goes into the bottom, we're under the car now. Right there, that's a screw that I already removed, and I'll get you the size on that. Now, look at that right there. As that line curves around, you see a little C-notch cut out of this metal housing right here. That's where the other screw is. So you just got to make sure where that little C-notch is, you get your tool in there. It's a little tricky. You're going to have to feel that with your finger, but that's where that other screw is. And I want to say there's others on top I haven't got to yet. And the only other thing I've done is, here, let's see, before we get too carried away, Those little line screws are Torx, and I don't know what size that is. Does it tell me on there? No. It was a little Torx tip though, so you'll just have to, you can get to that pretty easily from underneath. So just do that. And then the other thing that I've done so far is there's a clamp that goes around the turbo that connects it to that big exhaust pipe. I don't know if that's actually the catalytic converter. I guess it kind of looks like it. But I haven't really studied this car too much. But anyway, there's a 13 millimeter right up here, and that's what has the band clamp secure. So you're going to need to pull that out. And I'm going to continue on. That's where I'm at right now. So I need to do whatever it takes to get these lines off, find the other bolts, and then continue taking those little barrel nuts out. Alright, we're going back under the car. Okay, what I'm doing now is, I'm trying to see if this is focusing. I'm going around and I'm trying to see where all the turbo is fastened to the car. So there's, or I mean to the engine or whatever. So this little bracket is actually attached. You can barely see the round screw. Let's see if we get it to focus. Right up there. There's a screw, okay, it's a Torque, I can't remember which T it is or whatever, but right over here, there's actually, you see this bracket, see that reverse Torque right there? There's actually two of those. Sorry, no, it's up in there, here. Not the one you can see, okay, it's further up. Now there's a bracket, you can see that bracket's attached to the bottom of the turbo, and then there's two of these 10 millimeter reverse Torques on it. So you're going to have to get those off. Now this one I'm able to get to with a ratchet, the 3-inch extension, and the 10 millimeter reverse Torque. So it's able to spin. I had it on there a second ago. It's just I'm holding the camera now. But that will get that off. Now I might have to get the other one, which is forward of this. It's a little bit further forward. I might have to get that one off from above, or from over at a different hole, but I can get this rear one from under here. Alright, so to summarize a few things, the main parts of the turbo are held in by the copper barrel nuts that go around it, you know, the manifold area. Also the V-band clamp that holds it to the exhaust, that's a big one. You've got that small little kind of moon-shaped bracket at the bottom of the turbo, and it's got, you'll see some video on it, it's got two reverse Torque bolts, and then there's a bolt that holds it to the turbo, and we're going to talk about that more because that one needs to be the one that swivels a little bit, but you'll see it. So there's that bracket, and then also the stud that holds that intake pipe for the turbo underneath, where you take that 10 millimeter nut from. You're actually going to have to remove that stud as well because it has a bigger, I want to say it's like a larger hexagon area that you need to get like a wrench or a socket in there. And whenever you remove that stud, that's actually holding the turbo in as well. But for the most part, that's all that's really holding this thing in. You know, you've got the oil line that connects to it, or I want to say there was a drain and a return line. And then you've got the coolant lines that wrap around. Now those things are flexible. When I first looked at them, I was like, oh man, what is this? This just looks crazy the way they were wrapped around it so tight. But once you get the little Torx bolts out that hold those to the side of the turbo, they're pretty much flexible. And that was kind of one of the last things that I did. So as the turbo was ready to come out, it kind of moved them out of the way. Now you do need to be careful because you can bend those lines. So those coolant lines, you know, there's a part where there's aluminum at the top, and you don't want to bend that part, but then the rest of it, I want to say, was like a rubber flexible, and it wasn't too bad. So be kind of careful with those. Also, I feel like half of this work is going to be done from under the hood, and then the other half is going to be done with you under the car. So definitely get it up on jack stands. You know, it's probably a good 50-50 because there are some things that you can just get to a lot easier from underneath it, especially whenever you have to loosen up the exhaust and kind of, you know, move that back. Also, to start out, you're going to be removing the big plastic covers on the bottom of the car, and that's just get a drill with a socket or whatever on it, because there's a whole bunch of screws to take those things down. One thing that got me a little bit was those gaskets. So as you're prepping the turbo, the new one, to put it on the engine before you do it, one of the things you have to do is you get the new seals that go on the 4 manifold pipes. And those things are going to seem like they're a little bit too small. At least mine did. And I know that that material's not very strong, because it looked like as I was trying to kind of push one of them on, it almost wanted to start tearing. And I was like, okay, well, that's not cool. And I know these things were going to kind of be like a crush gasket. I think they get squeezed between the part, you know, on the engine and the manifold itself. But what I did was I took some 80 grit sandpaper and I just shaved the inside circle of these gaskets out and got them to fit on that turbo assembly properly. I didn't want to force it because I knew that they were going to break if I tried forcing them on. So that's one thing. Be really careful with those. Those little seals, I don't know, to me I was like, God, they're like junk, but whatever. For whatever reason, they got to be made out of this material. I don't know. It was just very, just seemed very brittle, and you could almost, you know, kind of smash the stuff. So that's one thing that you're going to have to do, but pay attention to the way certain things are. There's also another part where I'm explaining the swivel of the bottom bracket. So you got a bracket at the bottom of the turbo that's got 2 Torx bolts that hold it on. And the reason why I was explaining that in the video is because I found that, you know, you can get those bolts into the engine, but you don't want the bolt that holds the bracket to the turbo to be completely tightened, because as you're tightening up those barrel nuts and you're getting all your gaskets to squeeze up to the engine, that bracket needs to be able to move a little bit. And since there's no way to know exactly where you need to adjust it and tighten it, you just need to leave it where it's pretty snug. And that's also in the part of the video where I was saying that it's like a self-locking fastener. It allows you to tighten it to where if you move it a bit, the bolt's not going to loosen up. It's got a nice tight thread. So leave that little bracket with the 2 bolt holes that goes on the bottom of the turbo. Leave that thing a little bit loose when you're prepping the new turbo. That way it can spin just enough, it can pivot for you to tighten up all the barrel nuts, and it's not going to put anything on a bind with it, you know, as if it were completely tightened. Okay, so I've got the new turbo assembly in the car. Now, this is an utter nightmare. Like, I'd probably rather replace the whole engine than mess with this turbo by itself, because trying to get it in and out of this slot, it's just more of the frustration of there being so many things that you can break and damage, like particularly this little coolant line here. The turbo wants to hit the bottom of it, and I'm lucky I didn't screw up that, you know, when you're putting it back in, it wants to hit this little plug down here, which I think goes to this little, I don't know, it's like a water pump. It looks like it almost shaped like another turbo. Yeah, it's got radiator lines on it, so it's like a water pump. So basically, when you get it back in there, you're gonna work those barrel nuts back on, those copper colored ones, but you want to work them on kind of slow, and you want to make sure that as this thing's going on, you're not screwing up those donut gaskets that go on the 4 pipes, because those things are, I don't know what they're made of, but they just seem like a absolute nuisance of material. So you're going to be working those 10 bolts in slowly, but at the same time, when you transfer that bottom bracket over, I'm going to show it to you in a second. It's got 2 Torx bolts, the little bottom bracket at the bottom. When you transfer that over, you'll realize it's got a self-locking bolt, or the nut on the back. So you're going to tighten it for the most part, but the bolt locks in there so that you can let it swivel a little bit. You don't want it to be easily turnable by hand, but it should be kind of movable, so that as you're tightening the barrel nuts and as you're getting this thing seated, that bracket needs to be able to pivot just to make sure you get it exactly positioned the way it needs to be. Now also, The other thing that physically holds the turbo on is the stud. Let me see if I can get over here. Okay, so there's a stud that holds that intake pipe, right? Well, the stud goes in this little hole, and you can see right now it's not completely lined up. But as I get this turbo tightened and as it, as it gets into position, the hole is going to move over a little bit. So that's going to allow us to get that stud back into place. I'll show you what it looks like. It's this thing right here. So basically one side goes in to hold the turbo in place from the front, and then the other side holds your intake tube. When you slide that plastic tube back in here in the front of the engine, that's the stud that holds that. So basically, I'm going to work my way around. Let's go under the car really quick. You just want to slowly work all these things into place. And, alright, so you can see the hole where the bolt is missing right up there. It's tough to get that one in. And then back here, I've got this one already. Okay, it's right up there. So that one is in place. And then as you can see, I'm working those barrel nuts on. I need to tighten a little bit more, get them seated up there. But slowly but surely, you want to kind of pull this thing into place. And then this bracket, there's a dark colored Torx bolt right there I'm kind of pointing at. That's the one that you're going to have to put on with the turbo out of the car. You're taking that bracket off the old turbo. You're putting that on, but you want to leave that where at least that bracket can pivot a little bit, not super loose, but you want to leave it to where it's not extremely tight either. And then once you get all this seated, when the whole manifold's tight, you should be able to get those two bolts tight. You can probably go in and snug that last bolt, and then that'll hold everything in place. But also don't forget about the stud in the front that I just showed you. So that's what we're doing, working it into place. And this job, I don't like this job. This one is it's just like I said, it's more the frustration of like, what can I damage, trying to get that in and out. And I also had to pull the new actuator off too, because there was just no way that thing was going to go into place with that actuator hanging way out. So I left it connected, but I had to be careful, just pulling the bolts out, kind of moving it into place. It's a pain. I'm not going to say that this is easy. And I mean, as an experienced mechanic, a lot of work on F-18s, fighter jets and stuff, those things were like the hardest thing I've ever worked on because of space clearance and, not being able to get two hands anywhere. But I'll say this is definitely kind of a pain. It's not the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's definitely a pain. Okay, I just wanted to video the setup. I'm using a 7/8 crow's foot with a short extension to get that O2 sensor tightened back in. And that's exactly how I got it loose. I'm not going to tighten this thing up way. Also, when it comes to loosening these things, it's going to help you out a lot, like I probably said before, to heat around the bottom with your propane torch. So, getting this back together now. So the last thing I really had to do to finish this all up, once the main mechanical stuff was back fastened and all together, I had to build that little plug. Once my parts came in, I just added some wires, I think I used the colors that were close, and blue and orange or yellow, whatever it was. And I just put enough wire in the plug so that I could build the plug out of the car, and then I could easily solder the new wires that I made to the old broken wires. And that's the way that I ended up doing this part. So it's pretty straightforward. It seemed to work out just fine, and this allowed me to put everything back together the way it really was from the beginning. Alright, I think that's going to do it for this one. And if you got to replace that turbo on your F32 428i, Well, I wish you the best of luck. It's not a terrible job, but I'd rather not have to do another one. So thanks again for all the love and support out there. I always appreciate you guys. More videos to come very soon, and we'll see you on the next one.